First, let's talk about recoloring your object. That's the first thing that you asked about. Now, there are careful ways you can do this and less careful ways you can do this. The less careful way that you can do it is really just using the paint bucket to hit the object. So I'm going to point out this thing because I think it's too bright and it's mixing in with the windows that it's right near. So I'm going to, I want to change that color to something darker. Now in the picture, it is light, which is good that you included it because it makes it more interesting, but it's not this light. So let's try finding a color. And now I'm going to hit G to get the paint bucket. And all I have to do is hit it with the paint bucket. Now note that if you hit away from the anything on the layer, it's going to recolor the whole page. So if you're doing it this way, you just want to be careful to actually just hit the object that you are trying to recolor. Now you also have to make sure to be on the right layer for this. So to get to the right layer, you want to be on the move tool. Let's say we want to recolor this half of the building. I'm going to hit this, which jumps me to that layer, layer 19. And now if I want to recolor it, I can just make sure that I'm on the right layer, and then I just hit it with the paint bucket. I'm going to hit undo because that was seems like a good color for this building. Okay, now if you wanted to recolor something in the more safe way, or you have something more specific that you want to recolor, what you could do is select make the selection of the stuff on the layer, and that will also help you recolor things. So let's say I wanted to recolor these windows. So I hit one of them to get to the layer that's on layer 31. Now I'm going to hold down Command on my keyboard and hit the thumbnail for layer 31. This gets me the entire selection. This selects all of the pixels on layer 31. Now, if I wanted to recolor this, I could choose a color. Now, we could still use the paint bucket, but it's only going to color one at a time. Undo. And then what I could do is, so if I wanted to color them all, I could go to Edit, Fill, and then fill with the foreground color. That colored all of them. Now, let's say I wanted to just recolor the ones here, like I wanted to recolor all of these guys that are in the dark spot. I could subtract from the windows that aren't in the spot that I want to recolor. Now I have these windows selected, and now I don't want it to be so dark, so I'm going to choose this color over here, go to Edit, Fill, and go to OK, deselect, and now I've recolored those shapes. So either you're using, either you're making the selection, you're getting the marching ants back, or you can just use the paint bucket to hit the thing you want. The main thing when it comes to recoloring is just making sure that you're on the correct layer. Okay, your next thing that you had asked about was resizing stuff, so that way it's the right size, or if you mess up on a shape. Now what I'd say is, what matters is that things look right at the end. It doesn't really matter if it matches up to the photograph when I grade it. I'm not comparing it to the original one, so it doesn't really matter. But you can resize things. Something that might matter is if you made something that looks or feels wrong and then you want to resize it instead of redrawing it. That could work. Something you could also do is move things. So and this works only if you drew everything on separate layers. So let's say right here, this is kind of off. We see a gap, and I can tell when I turn the blue layer on. So luckily you did this on 2 different layers, which is good because it means that we can scooch it down. So I'm using my arrow tools, and now we've closed that gap. The gap is still over here, so maybe we can scooch it over again that way. There we go, even better. Okay, if we wanted to fix things, let's say, I'm going to start with the trimming option. And let me just show you on a totally different object. I'm just going to trace something. So I'm going to go on top of this, just making a new layer. So if I make this rectangle, well, you know what? Let's let's trace something. I'm going to make this building and I'm going to turn this off. And I'm going to fill it in with a bright color so that way we can see it. Okay, now if I compare it to the original photograph, it's in the wrong spot. So there are a few things I could do to fix this. The first thing is I could free transform it. So free transforming is when is like resizing in Illustrator. You'd go to Edit, Free Transform, and then you get these boxes, and then you can just resize it and make it bigger. Note that the perspective doesn't really change when you free transform things, so sometimes it can look a little weird. And by default in Photoshop, it does constrain the proportions, which is a good thing. So you don't need to hold Shift. If you want to not constrain the proportions, you would need to uncheck this link. But anyway, that's free transforming, and that's how you would make something bigger. The other option, if you made something and you can also make something smaller in the same way, the shortcut is Command T. That's how you get free transform as a shortcut. And then you could resize it in the other direction. Then you have to hit OK, the check mark. Now, if you made something too big or you made something wrong and you want to fix it, that would be trimming or adding to the selection. And I'm going to show you that now. I see in general your windows look really good. There are a few, I only see 3, that's a few, places that you might want to fix. Let's say this one, like this window right here, looks a little weird, but that's really not a very big deal. We can just trim this excess space, and you wouldn't free transform to fix this. You would trim it. So what I'm going to do is I'm on the right layer, and I got to the layer by hitting the Move tool and then hitting the windows to get on layer 37, L for the lasso, and now I'm going to just make the selection of what I want to cut away, and then I hit delete, and now I have trimmed the excess weird wonky spot away. Now let's say what's making this weird is actually not that it was, I'm hitting undo, not that it was too wide at the top, but that it's too narrow at the bottom. So in this situation, what we would do is add to the selection rather than to delete from trim from the selection. So I'm going to make a selection of what I want to add. I want to be in the right color, so I hit I to get the eyedropper tool. It seems like you just used white, which if that's the case, you could just choose white. But if you want to make sure that you get the right color, you could just use the eyedropper tool. Now, instead of using the paint bucket, I'm going to go to Edit, Fill with the foreground, and deselect. And now we've fixed that. I see that my bottom looks a little weird now, so I'm just going to trim the bottom so it is straight. Perfect. Now here, there's also like this weird stuff on the top, so we can trim this away. So I'm just selecting the stuff that I want to delete and deleting it. On this layer over here, V for the Move tool, I see this little triangle. We can get rid of this. I'm not sure if this is what you were asking for, but this is how you fix these little problems. Command D to deselect. Because this isn't really resizing. This is trimming away. Now, I just want to point out, nothing happened even though I'm hitting delete because I'm not on this layer. So there are no pixels here on layer 32. So for this to work, I'm going to need to be on layer 35. And now I just did that. Now I see that there's a problem here because it looks to me like layer 35 is this black trim as well as this window, which is not ideal, but it's not a big deal. It just means that we're going to have to be a little more careful when I cut this. So I just want to avoid getting the gray in the selection. Command D to deselect, and now we are fixed. Okay, so that is how you would recolor something and resize something. I'm going to talk about how to approach these windows here in a different video.